And this is also my grandfather. And this is also my grandfather. I know what you're thinking. I'm a pretty cute baby, and you're not wrong. But also, my grandfather likes to smile a lot. Growing up, I used to think he was just one of those people who were naturally happy. You know, the glass half full kind of guy. The type of person who sees the sunny side of things even when it's raining. The type of person who sees the light even when there's a power outage, which in Sri Lanka, there were many. But what I didn't understand back then was that his smile, it was hard-earned. It wasn't just something that came easily or automatically. It was something he had to choose every single day. Just a little bit of a heads up, I'm going to go into a little bit of a history lesson, so bear with me for a bit. But in 1983, Sri Lanka erupted into one of the most brutal and longest civil wars in modern day history. The conflict lasted nearly 3 decades, from 1983 all the way up until 2009. After Sri Lanka gained independence from British rule in about 1948, tensions between the Sinhalese majority and the Tamil minorities only deepened. A series of discriminatory laws and government policies, including the Sinhala Only Act in 1956, systematically marginalized Tamil communities. Over time, inequality, disenfranchisement, and ethnic tensions escalated. But the breaking point, it came in Black July. In July of 1983, Sinhalese mobs took at least 3,000 innocent Tamil lives, destroyed homes, destroyed businesses, and displaced 150,000 Tamil people. Many Tamil women were raped, families were separated. It prompted into the first largest exodus of Tamil history. Almost 500,000 Tamil people left the island, left the country, a place where they called home. What followed were waves of organized state-sanctioned violence against Tamil civilians across the country. This event is known as Black July. It marked the beginning of a civil war that would last more than 25 years. It displaced entire communities, separated families, and left wounds that are still felt today. My grandfather was one that was caught in this crossfire. He wasn't a soldier or a fighter. He was just an ordinary man trying to live his life, a businessman, a husband, a father. But during that time, survival was everything. One day, everything changed. You see, he moved 300 miles away from his wife, from his family, from everything he knew, just for more economic opportunities. So he wrote letters. He wrote letters to my grandmother detailing everything he did that day. Back then, there weren't cell phones. There weren't quick text messages or FaceTime calls, and I know a lot of you will be happy to hear this. There weren't Teams or Zoom meetings. What they had were letters. They were 300 miles apart, living in 2 different sides of the country, separated by work and circumstance, but bound by these beautiful handwritten letters. He told her everything in those letters, what he ate for breakfast that day, how his day at his shop went, how he missed her, and how he couldn't wait to come back home. And then he heard it, screaming. At first, he told me he thought it was an ordinary argument. You know, the one that arrives during tense times when anger and fear simmer just beneath the surface. But then he heard it again, louder and angrier. And then something in his body told him that this was going to be different. He got up slowly, walked towards the door of his apartment, and pressed his ears against it. Then he heard it again. He opened the door just a crack, and then he saw them. A group of men dragging his cousin outside of his apartment. His cousin, who he had grown up with, a man who had held his children on his knees. They tied him up, poured gasoline over him, and set him on fire. He watched, frozen. He told me once that in that moment, time played its own little game. Every second stretched out longer than it should have. He could hear his heartbeat in his ears, and he could smell that smoke before it filled the streets. And he also smelled another smell that no human should be able to smell. And he knew then that they were going to come for him next. He ran, not down the stairs, not out the front door, but through the back. He slipped into the darkness, into the shadows, and into a bush behind his apartment complex. He crouched there in the dirt, his chest tight, his hands shaking, and he stayed there for hours, maybe even longer. He never really told me how long. From his hiding place, he watched as neighbors, as friends, as families all get dragged out. That day, he saw 7 more bodies being burnt alive. And when the streets finally grew quiet, and when the screaming stopped, and when there was nothing except silence, he still stayed there. He stayed there in the dark because he wasn't sure it was over, because survival meant staying invisible. After that day, his life was never really the same. I mean, how could it be? And yet, in every memory, in every photo, he's smiling. My grandfather survived that day. He made it out of Galley, he left Sri Lanka, came to Canada, and rebuilt his life from almost nothing. But survival was only really the beginning. What came after, what came next, was far harder. You see, he had to live with the weight of what he saw. He had to rebuild his home, his community, his sense of trust in the world, which was all stripped away from him. And he did, though, slowly, quietly, brick by brick, smile by smile, he rebuilt his entire life. For a long time, I thought that's what his story was meant to be, you know, a story about survival. But now I understand. It's about what comes after survival. It's about what comes next. I think about this every day as the work I do as a health researcher, because it's not enough for communities to just merely survive. What's next has to be a future where people can thrive. What's next is a healthcare system that honors who a person is. What's next is where people are no longer forced to be resilient, but free to simply live. And that's why I continue this work, because I carry my grandfather's legacy with me. That legacy of rebuilding, that same legacy I see in Indigenous communities in Canada who are fighting for equity, who are fighting against injustice, and who are fighting for a future for them, their family, and their friends and loved ones. For me, this isn't just research, it's personal. It's about standing alongside communities as they move beyond survival. It's about understanding that healing doesn't happen to communities, it happens with them. It's about knowing that when to show up, when to commit to doing better. When I first started doing this work, I thought I would try to find answers, you know, concrete ones with numbers, data, outcomes, results. But the deeper I went, the more I realized that sometimes the most important answers aren't found in research papers, in textbooks, in policy documents, or even conferences. They're found in stories that often go unheard. I wanted to understand why, despite decades, and I mean decades, of medical advancements, despite life-saving treatments, why some communities are still fighting for basic quality of care. Take HIV, for example, a disease we know how to treat, we know how to prevent, we know how to manage, but why is it disproportionately impacting Indigenous communities? This question led me to do my research on the barriers of HIV prevention and care. On paper, we really do have the tools. We have PrEP, a medication that reduces HIV by 99%. We have PEP, a medication that stops HIV if taken soon after exposure. We even have DoxyPEP, another innovative medication that's stopping STIs altogether. But what we don't have is trust. What we don't have is access, and what we don't have are systems in place that reflect the realities of Indigenous peoples, because truth be told, these communities went gone through more than we could ever imagine. Colonization, the 60s scoop, forced removal of children to residential schools, policies that stripped them away from their land, their identity, their tradition, and also healthcare that's doing them more harm than good. And yet, here they are, still surviving, still fighting for themselves, for their families, for their future. But now, they're asking a different question. They're asking, what's next? What's next after centuries of survival? What's next after generations of injustice? What's next after loss so profound, it is impossible to put into words? What's next is justice. What's next is healing. What's next are services that aren't imposed on communities, but are built in tangent with them. Services that reflect their values, their knowledge, their languages, and their right to self-determination. What's next has to be a future where Indigenous communities don't just survive, but thrive. Rebuilding trust, it isn't easy work. It's not supposed to be, especially when trust has been broken down over multiple generations. It takes listening, it takes accountability, it takes doing the work, especially when no one is watching. When I sit in a room with Indigenous knowledge holders and elders, people who have carried their communities through loss, but also through love and through laughter, I realize that what's next? It's already happening. It's happening in healing circles. It's happening in language revitalization programs. It's happening in quiet moments of community care that never really make the headlines. But what's next It needs all of us. Sure, we have policymakers, we have researchers, we have medical professionals, but what we really need are allies. We need allies who are willing to follow the lead of Indigenous communities, not just direct them. I have learned more from Indigenous communities about what it means to move forward than I will ever learn in a textbook. My grandfather's story didn't end with survival. Neither will the stories of Indigenous communities. These are stories of resilience, sure, but they're stories of hope. They're stories of vision. They're stories about reclaiming what is yours to be. What's next is a question that belongs to all of us. It not only takes how we move forward, but how we honor the strength it took to survive and how we make sure no one has to go through this path alone. What's next? It is hope, but it's also action. And it's time we put them hand in hand and start doing it tomorrow. I think about my grandfather's smile a lot. How it showed up in every photo, how he lived through everything. But I used to wonder, how could he smile like this? But now I understand. This smile, it wasn't about happiness. It was about hope. It was about believing in what's next, especially when it was hard to see. Because I believe if we listen, if we act, and if we stand together, we can help create a future where more people, more communities can get to smile like that too. Thank you.